Wonderful. Yeah, a little bit me. I'm in South Florida, Boca Raton. I'm coming not from industry. Last 5 years, I'm working with owners from a process oriented and happen to work on technology. So I'm looking for ways how we can use, because none of my owners uses BIM as a way they should be, or softwares like StructionSite where they can use visuals, looking to advise them how we can learn from the GC industry, AEC industry, and how we can get advantage so that our projects we can get reporting with. So I have a strong passion of automation in general. I'm always finding ways to get accuracy from system, not the human. And this is one of the long dreams that we're working to. If can we get it automated so that we can trust the data and not human interpretation? That's a long shot, but I am passionate, and one day we'll solve that. Happy to be here to moderate this session. So today we're going to talk about 3 phases: alignment, realization, certification. How do we align the stakeholders? What are those basics rules? What are the success of requirements? As Laurie said, she's passionate about organization, data structure, how they're looking at these systems. How do we structure that? And then when we move into realization, we start building, prefabricating, or designing into real world. How do we connect the dots? How do we keep it sure? And finally, when the asset is developed, handed over in production in use, what should we do? How can we transfer the data for each of these 3 phases together? Laurie, next.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Laurie. I am a group product manager at Autodesk Construction Solutions. And before that, I worked in the industry for a number of years. My interest, I'm actually, one of the products that I am responsible for is Assemble, which is a tool that helps customers manage model data. And we really focus on kind of like the setup part. Like we do tracking on the actual, but like the organization of information and organization of model data, and really prepping it, I think, for the collection in the field. So I'm very interested in automating setup, managing setup, reducing the amount of manual work in setup, because of course, anytime a process has a manual step, it's a point of failure. So that's kind of the approach of almost reciprocal to phrase focus on reality capture.
Wonderful. Bree, you next.
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, Brianna Williams. Similar style to Laurie here. Came from the industry, working for a variety of GCs on different project types. And the last 3 years, I kind of switched over to the product side, working at StructionSite. From my perspective, why I'm excited about this topic is there's obviously a lot of really amazing things that we could do if we unblock some of the capabilities of the tools that are out there. And I think part of that is just all of us having a common understanding of what things we need to do better, what things we need to be more on top of, ahead of, in order to make some of these workflows a little bit more attainable for those in the industry. So just trying to be a part of the conversation of how can we start thinking about things in a different way, and how do we start working our way towards that?
Awesome, thank you. Anil?
Thanks, Sid. My name is Anil Sawhney. I work for an organization called RICS. It's the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. We are a professional body, a member-based organization with a global footprint, about 135,000 members globally. I work as the global construction and infrastructure sector lead for RICS. I live outside of DC, about 30 minutes outside of DC. I'm here to really learn, one, but also within this topic, perhaps raise the issue of international standards, information classification systems, and how they can help automate, as Laurie mentioned, much of the setup information, much of the usage of data through standardization and classification of construction information.
And And then handing over to, for real focus today, all these three focus today, can we develop an open standard across the industry, across the different stakeholders between general contractor, AE, trade contractors, as well as owners? Can we remove the manual waste, manual interpretation, and can we get them on the same board so that in future that everybody, all the stakeholders can look at the same piece of data and they can trust it. Trust is a rare commodity in our industry. So hopefully we can find solutions to get there. Handing over to Bree, talk about the previous sessions we had. Bree and Laurie, take it from there.
Yeah, so I will jump over here to kind of talk about what we did in Denver. So where we kind of started with this was the concept of like reality capture, use case for rapid production verification. So we were thinking about how can we measure field productivity in ways that forecast, based on reality capture. So that's kind of a high summary of it. And where we kind of started was mapping out what the current scenario looks like. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's a little bit of a mess. And what we were kind of learning here is that this forecasting and planning step is critical for anything to be captured and actualized, and then to be analyzed. So if we can't execute on this step, you either have to spend a ton of time and energy to do this, which no one has, and or you only get partial bits of information and it really is incomplete, and so people don't trust it, so that they don't, they won't want to use it to analyze it if they can't necessarily trust what they're statusing against. So once we kind of looked at what is current state, we mapped out what do we think is the ideal future state here. So when we pan over to future state, there's this concept of the plan should no longer be disparate, and there should be a way that everything can be coordinated. So when you look at this kind of data lake that isn't necessarily owned by one entity, but it's just a shared repository, it doesn't have to be a data lake. It could be that all the information maps consistently. It could be that it's all automated in the way that it's compared and collected. But the idea is that you can have your P6, you can have your estimate, your coordinated model, your building scan, all these things tie together through this consistent work breakdown structure, location, unit of measure, but having consistency across all the different teams and bodies that are generating the plan makes it a lot easier for that capture and actualize state to then push it over to analyze. So when we talk about the like digital supply chain here, it's you have to start with something, and then in order to bring it all the way through to the end to be able to analyze it, and then go back and correct as needed. So this is kind of a summary of what we had gotten through in Denver. And I think just taking a step back, we all realize that it's going to take quite a bit of time and energy to get to this ideal state where the plan is really easy and smooth. And that's what I think is spurring this conversation that Sid's going to be moderating around. What are the things that we need to be collecting in the plan? What sources, what file types, who's a part of it? So if we can really start understanding, how we can make this collectively a better experience, the rest of those dominoes will hopefully fall in line. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how can we really nail down this so that the rest of it can follow? Sid, is there anything else you think is worth noting? Laurie, anything I missed there?
I think that was pretty good. I think we'll probably get into some like the nuances and back and forth as we dig into the details. But that was a great summary of what we talked about in Denver.
Yes, I agree with you. I think also want to talk about there are too many systems, right? You touched about a little bit on the front end. Well, GC has their own system, trade contractors their own system, and so does AE. And even I'm working from an owner perspective, we're using capital planning Excel sheets. That's my system, not even a system. And we're kind of populating projects out of Excel sheet from the start of a project, intending contractors or traders, hey, this is what we want to do. So that's kind of the start. It's how do we structure that? And then, we have Anil in the room. He represents a global organization who's on a mission to standardize standards. And, I like the name Royal RICS. One more time, Anil? it's a UK-based, like a nonprofit helping to standardize unit of measures.
Correct, yes. So it's a Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, where the term surveyors is probably confusing in the sense that we use the term surveyors to have all pathways, all practitioners within the built environment sector.
And
Talk us about the I'm sorry, go ahead, Bree.
yeah, I just question there because when I worked at Lend-Lease, they were international and they called it quantity surveyor versus like an estimator. Is that part of the root of the word, surveyor, Anil?
So yes, the term surveyor can be associated with land surveying. We have building surveyors, you have valuation surveyors. So the use of our term is in surveyors is broad, but you're absolutely right. About 40,000 of our members are in the field of quantity surveying, which loosely should be equated to project controls, cost management, not necessarily just cost estimating, but cost management.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Talk to us about the NRM. Like, what is that? New rules of measurement. Sounds intriguing.
So RICS is about 154-year-old entity, and we've been publishing rules of measurement for essentially creating or estimating quantities. These are the inclusions and exclusions. They've been called the standard methods of measurement. I think about 60 years ago that was published. Now, more recently, an updated version of NRM, which are the new rules of measurement. So our focus, if you look at it, you painted a big picture, Laurie and Brianna. You talked about all kinds of data or information. Our first primary focus is on cost data. So all the rules of measurement and quantity surveying work first focuses on cost-related information. So there are three parts of NRM. NRM 1 is essentially a cost management document. It helps you do cost planning, and this is where at least cost-related information comes in. NRM connects to something very similar to Uniformat called Uniclass, which is a construction information classification system. So NRM 1 gives you high-level cost management principles. NRM 2 gives you literally like an RS means kind of a detailed measurement book. And NRM 3 does the same thing, but for the life cycle stages of operation and maintenance and end of life. So sort of, if you look at a project and an asset, NRM 1, 2, and 3 together help you at least bring standardization to cost information. But here we are talking probably broader than that. So we're trying to connect this to other pieces of data or information relating to scheduling, to production, to tracking progress, and maybe even sustainability related information.
So is NRM like adopted in like Europe world, and do you see that also happening in North America? Where do you see that?
So NRM is extremely or heavily utilized in Commonwealth countries. So for example, Middle East, very heavily utilized. I think less so in the US. There is some application in Canada. I doubt we'll be able to directly influence the US market with NRM, but the broad principles behind NRM, which is about standardization, about using a coding system or a structure, about using a cost management, cost planning system, probably we can influence that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm interested in this topic.
All right. And just, out of curiosity, like in the Middle East and the Commonwealth countries, is it like the standard out there that, okay, you got to do this project, we have to apply NRM rules? Is it already like part of the contractual documents? How
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every project is either using NRM, the latest version or the previous version. including Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand. So NRM is a standard in many of those markets.
So Dylan and Jared, what question comes to your mind? I'm learning about NRM first time today. So what's your thoughts? Have you heard about this? Anything you're doing simply at your program level that you follow it?
Sorry.
I haven't heard about it. I've seen it. I guess one question I have is who's the driver of this? Is this like are owners requesting this to their contractors and engineers, or who's really driving this process?
So this is driven by owners or clients, like in the Middle East, most owners, developers. I had actually just spoken to somebody in Dubai, a large developer called Aldar. They use for their internal cost management system NRM. So then therefore the supply chain, contractors, subcontractors, vendor suppliers, all consultants have adopted NRM also. So I think not necessarily worry about the structure, but the concept of standardization is something that's very important. The NRM is based, as you can see here, on an elemental approach, whereas in the US, we've used mostly a discipline or trade-based approach, like the RF means, for example. Or a CSI master format, for example. So the principles are probably the same, but the actual implementation varies by market.
Anil, I have a question, pressure testing for you and also for Dylan and Jared. I love your responses. And this is an area where I tread into deep water really quickly. I'm not an expert, but what I've observed, at least on American construction projects, is that they'll actually use different organizing structures, classification systems by the phase of a project, right? So for example, when doing estimating, you might use uniformat because it's a systems based. The way it organizes is not by trade, but by if you're looking at wall finishes, it might be wall finishes to inside, wall finishes to exterior, column finishes. Or types of concrete, right? Like slab or, slab on grade, cast in place, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually looking at different systems of materials, and that is appropriate for estimating because you'd apply a different price per square foot. However, once it moves into the construction phase, it moves into a CSI format, which I believe is largely dictated by specifications and contract structures and a little bit about how we buy out. So we're actually using multiple multiple organizing structures within one project, not even just that we don't have a standard cross projects. And question, is that something that we can actually change? If we talk about, and so what it does is it conceptually, it breaks down the plan to actual. If you're tracking your actual against CSI and you're tracking your plan against a uniformat, how do you start comparing those two back and forth? I'm curious about your thoughts on that dichotomy, and also Anil, if that's something that you've resolved in some way, or that's not an issue in your experience.
So sitting in our ivory tower, that's what we want to promote, right? This document says do cost planning. The cost planning should connect back to your estimating, procurement, the way you do construction. All of that should be unified. But does it really happen? Probably not. And you're right, means you can switch between an elemental or a systems-based information classification to a work package or a discipline-based or contract-based classification system onto something else when you go to handover. The only way we have been able to resolve that is to map all of that. So if you're able to seamlessly map from one to the other, your purpose is solved, rather than forcing people's habit of not using one classification system and using another one is very difficult. So the mindset issue comes in. But if systems can can be mapped, or classifications can be mapped. It makes life much easier. I worked with one of your colleagues early on in the cost management module that you guys had, in which you could switch between master format, uniformat, and R classification system on a project, because you can have multiple classification on an element or a work item. So you can easily switch between these, and that map helps you in the switching process.
Is that what you guys do, Dylan, Jared? Or
Well,
is this a problem we solve?
yeah, that's a problem we kind of run into all the time. Is everybody wants to follow different standards because there is no, locked in standard. So having a classification that can be communicated and mapped out, like you were saying, it does kind of drive that adoption. So it's easier to have a little bit more buy-in if we're using, this classification and someone else is using a different classification or a different system. But if they can be, one-to-one relevant, then there's a lot of roadblocks that are just removed from that course of action because of that. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. And we don't want to force this particular set of classifications or documents or contract or anything like that onto a project and make everybody follow that, because we can sometimes run into issues with teams that just won't bid, or they won't want to participate, or we're limiting our pool of resources just because we've chosen one system like this. So yeah, like I said, having that mapped out is very valuable.
And Jared and Dylan, about in your organization, how do you do that? Like, what's your plan for comparing data, accurate plan? Like you mentioned, you both have VDC and reality tracking experience, at least exposure more than I do. So tell us, what's your experience been so far for tracking accurate data and comparing it?
Yeah, it's owner driven, whatever the owner wants. But no, it's a lot of what do they want? What are they going to use it for? And then we do a lot of exploration and quantification of, is that meeting the targets that will help the project? What's good for the project, regardless of what the owner is looking for. We're very agnostic. We just want the best possible outcome. So there's a lot of maybe you should go with this certification or this way of doing things, but we're not going to force it on anyone, and that's where we're at anyways.
Yeah, we haven't really been we're not there yet for taking reality capture data and turning that into means of progress. Something that I'd like to learn more about ultimately, but for our organization, we're not there yet.
So how do you guys compare data? Like, what's your method? Like, I'll be honest, my owners are working with GC. A PM is managing 10 sites. He's gonna go physically once a month and have a phone call and say, yeah, this looks good. Your PC looks good? I'm gonna say yes, proceed. They're busy. I mean, I wish they had more data points, but that's what they're relying on. Verbal meetings, on-site visits, and whatever the GC is sending them on P6, they kind of use their best judgment and experience to call it out. No standards. Yeah, it's directed by the GC. And you're in the GC on the other side of self. So you tell us about where you are today. If you can share that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, with Bowen, where I work, it's a little different because we self-perform the large majority of the work we do. So we are kind of in control of all that. So we have kind of our experts in the field who are doing the work for us, and it kind of streamlines that communication where we're not relying on a subcontractor external source to feed us that progress data. We have the folks in the field that track that, and we're very meticulous in how we track the work that we're installing. And so it's just it's all fed through internal channels for a large majority of the work we do.
Yeah, and we lean more towards like advanced work packaging, so tracking, utilizing advanced work packages, so we know what we're going to be doing, and then since the project is broken into such small pieces and IWPs, we can really communicate where the project is versus where it actually is. And then yeah, we use a lot of 4D simulations to try and follow, what was forecast versus what is actually happening versus like how do we catch back up, or if we're so far ahead, what can we move on to. We don't have a ton of set standards right now on reality capture utilizing like drones or point cloud or anything like that, but we do have some experience utilizing construction walk applications where we're capturing that 360-degree and then utilizing that to be very transparent to maybe not the project team, but to owners and stakeholders, so that if we say, floor one has all of this certain element installed, you can jump in and you can see that for yourself. But as far as like a hard, on Monday you go and do this task to show that you've completed this set of work, I don't think that happens as well as we would hope.
So Sid, I have a question for you based on what just Dylan said. For a busy owner, in your view, is show and tell sufficient? If I can just play a video of a laser scan and other 360-degree camera views, is that sufficient, or they really want to get into the details of counting the studs and the nails?
Busy owners don't do that. Busy owners love multi-vista. They love visuals, and they're looking at a screenshot or a camera feed and talking to their, in an OAC meeting, let's discuss the issues, and that's how they're solving and moving ahead. So they're looking at person. They are some sophisticated owners I work with are definitely looking at EVM. When they're managing, 500 projects, EVM is their one parameter to look at it. It's always a case, is EVM correct or not correct? How they're measuring it. That's all.
Sorry, what does
another
it stand for?
Pardon me?
What does EVM stand for?
EVM, or earned value management. Earned value management.
Oh, okay. EVM.
Yeah, earned value.
I'm with you.
EVM. Yeah. So they're trying to hedge at a program level. Like I work with a big county. They're doing $1 billion of capital program, 700 projects, and the way from them to measure the health of their program is some kind of metrics, and they're looking at, can we get a cost view and a schedule view at a high level and do it, but the accuracy of the data is debatable.
I think we see some larger owners from our perspective that are doing some really interesting things around measuring contractors against each other. And I think this speaks to the potential power owners with building programs have that they're not leveraging. Like, it's almost terrifying. They're like looking at contractors and they're measuring like form completion compliance and rating the contractor and saying, you're not as good as this contractor over here.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting thing of like, when I was a GC, I don't think I ever wanted the owner to realize their power.
Yeah, we have a lot of owners that are starting to approach us, and they want to be part of the project more than ever before, and they want all of this transparency, and they want a digital twin, and they want autonomous everything. And really, when we start to break it down, they don't want that. What they really want is, a little Power BI dashboard that they can click on once a day and and see the project metrics. They don't need to see the technical information. They don't need to see, you know, all the little nerdy bits and pieces that get everyone excited, but they just don't care. They want to have control over the project without micromanaging everything. But yeah, like Laurie, like you said, they are competing or ranking GCs against one another, and sometimes their metrics are a little bit skewed. So it's an interesting spot where the industry is right now.
And I think it's funny to compare, or like interesting, I should say, to compare different kinds of owners and what do they want. And so I can contrast like an owner that is building data centers as a program is going to be very different than, say, a hotel chain that is building hotels versus a university that is building out a campus and has a capital projects versus like a Tishman Speyer that's building spec office buildings and looking to flip them in 3 years. I think it's interesting. Like, I think they probably all care. All of those folks are building multiple buildings. They probably care about understanding the value that they're getting from contractors. But the Tishman Speyer who is working as a pure economic actor versus the corporate, the university campus, they're going to have very different interests in knowing information about like the long-term health of their building, right?
So to tell us about, Laurie, just I know what are they measuring? Maybe owners, GCs, and trade contractors might need to know that. Like you mentioned, compliance. Like, you know, what are they measuring? Are they measuring ABC? What are you seeing in the industry?
Oh, I'm halfway speculating here.
Okay.
I've had some conversations with some larger owners that, have different building programs. I think the ones that are most engaged are folks who are building things like data centers, right? Who are looking at this as, the time to, like, what are the things that are important? Time to market's incredibly important. Efficiency in building, efficiency in maintaining a data center, right? Versus a spec office building, right? Like you really care about the performance of the data center, whereas the spec office building, you're going to offload that cost. So I'm not an expert, but like those are some of the things that I've observed. Curious if other folks weigh in. And I also think like then turning it back to the GC is, why does an owner care about progress tracking and reality capture versus why does the GC care about why? And a question for the GC folks is like, why do you care about getting accurate information in the field? Like, why is that important to you? It's a little bit of a soft question, but
another question on
go ahead.
that topic. Just in terms of owners, and I guess Dylan, I'm curious to hear your perspective on the jobs you were talking about, where owners are kind of more involved in talking to you a lot more about wanting whatever they want. Do you see those projects where owners are more engaged going better? Because I know in my experience, like we kind of appreciate owners being involved and asking more questions and wanting more things out of us because they're more engaged and we can typically get answers quicker and things go smoother, and they're just, I don't know, they tend to be more proactive.
Yeah, we I think it depends. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword if the owner is engaged more in the project and they're coming into the project as kind of this collaborative partner, then the project goes really well. Like you said, they're quick to respond to information. They can make changes that impact their project in a beneficial way. They bring in end users that can influence design and construction to, just have a better overall project at the end of the day. It's when it's when the owner comes in and they want to be part of the project, but they're just there to kind of, beat everyone down with the stick, and they're just driving for cost. That's when having the owner more involved is super detrimental to the project. So it's really the mindset of the owner that we partner with, whether that turns from a good project to a bad project. But yeah,
Yeah, that
I
makes sense.
personally, I want the owner to be involved. I want operations teams to be involved. I want people that are going to be working in the building to be involved. I want, you know, that data or that collaboration hub of the project to be accessible to everyone. So if there's a sub trade on the job and there's a journeyman or like a brand new electrician and he has some thought or something that can improve the project, I want to hear that. I think that utilizing the collective knowledge or experience of everybody on the project, regardless of, you know, where they're from or what they're doing, just benefits the project overall.
Sounds good. And Anil, you've been consulting with some owners and some industry. What do you see?
I think I really like Dylan's comment and Jared's comment about the owner's interest in the project. If you take a very simplistic view, if we provide them with a dashboard, I get the point of collaboration and versus micromanagement. Leaving that aside, if there's a dashboard that is providing real-time project and asset health information, and health could be in terms of cost, carbon, schedule, health and safety, whatever you want to define. So if they have at a higher level this dashboard, which may be a sort of a traffic signal exception-based dashboard, if you see red, then you can drill deeper. As long as that dashboard is not just a show and tell somebody's qualitative judgment, but is connected deep into the data, then the problem that we are discussing here gets very nicely connected, because now we are able to bring the worldview of the owner within the realm of what the GC is looking for and what other project team members are looking for. What I mean by that is if this GC or the constructor has lots of data, that data is, I am referring back to your future state or best state diagram that Laurie and Brianna, you explained. In that scenario, if the data is well structured, it follows one or many standards, but at least those standards are available. And then it can be utilized to summarize to any level of detail or any higher level of information. I think we would have accomplished this purpose, because if we keep them disjointed, meaning present the owner with a pretty picture based on maybe some video information or somebody's qualitative assessment of progress, and have the remaining detailed data poorly classified, not well connected, unable to be summarized at a higher level, I think the solution would not be optimal. So in my view, and when we talk to owners, like I'm currently working with Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, who are trying to develop a cost management system that is connected to their estimating department, to the VDC and the BIM process. They are also interested in the same information, but it needs to be sliced, diced, and summarized in a slightly different way.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Anil. And I think part of it is, I mean, you touched on a few things that stuck out to me, that like showing data in a way that you think is important to someone else is typically a misstep, because if you're showing them something, but it's not how they measure or what the way they group things or the way they think about the picture, really doesn't land or doesn't resonate. So understanding what are the most important things that that person care about, and how do we format in a way that they can digest it. I mean, one of the things that I've been working with trades and contractors on is both of them have to submit a payment application at the end of the month, but trades measure things based on production, and contractors measure things against this like concept of progress and work installed. And they're both grouped and packaged totally separate, but at the end of the day, they have to be tied together, but there's nothing tying them together. So this like unbiased data doesn't exist, because I'm measuring it my way, I'm measuring it my way. So we both try and like force format it to a kind of similar way, but it's square peg, round hole. And so therefore this owner gets this qualitative not quantitative measurement of what was done. And then it gets put in this format that, to like Laurie's point on how you structure things at the beginning, it's based on the GC structure, not necessarily the owner structure at the end of the day.
Yeah, good point. And it's easy to manipulate data, right? So it's easy to make the data look like what you need it to look like.
Oh,
But
so true.
yeah, so
data is so
wanna push that.
crucial. I'm gonna make a chart look like anything.
yeah.
Oh
exactly.
yeah. Like, oh, I'm just going to pull this field instead, and I'm going to deprioritize. Like, how do we make sure that when it's structured and mapped, that each person can quickly say, I don't want to see it in this format, I want to see it in this, and know that we're not getting this like pretty painted picture.
One interesting solution I've seen to this, and this is, and I think that, Anil, this is also, perhaps you can lend your global perspective. This is probably a particularly American problem, because we tend to have the GC model where we manage contracts via lump sums. We care about percentage complete. We don't pay by quantities, right? And so, you know, obviously subcontractors are, so we make subs take on the labor risk, right? So they're tracking quantity and labor hours, and they're trying to charge for that. And then we actually care about percentage complete. So I don't care whether you've spent 50% of your labor budget, only 30% of the things are installed or whatnot. Yeah. And we don't have a unit price per quantity installed. But the one interesting solution I saw here was a contractor that actually set up a Power BI that was one being fed from their perspective. They were tracking, it happened to be using Assemble, but the GC was tracking, and they fed that into an Power BI, and then the subcontractors were using something else to track, and they would actually feed them into the same spreadsheet. So you would see like the GC's indicator of progress right next to the subcontractor's indicator of progress for a certain area. I thought that was really cute.
We've seen some similar case studies done where the contractor was measuring the production rate of the trade partners, and they were able to say, okay, if this is the duration of the scheduled work, and this is the rate at which you're executing against that, halfway, they were able to say, oh man, we have a red flag. There's no way we're going to be able to get that production rate. So that trade's not going to be able to be successful. And they were able to go to the trade and say, what's happening? Can we help? Turns out there was a few things on the floor that the GC could help with, and they were able to resolve the problem. And I think some of this is so tied to this like concept of, we're going to use this information as a hammer, not as a way to help each other.
And there's a lack of trust. Like, it is actually
very silo. Absolutely.
It's easy. I was on a project where we had to build a concrete wall. It was concert hall. It was a 60-foot concrete wall, and we could not do anything else until we like did this ring. And it was like pretty goddamn clear pretty quick that this was going to stretch out our schedule, right?
Yeah.
But then the flip side, so we were trying to figure out how to accelerate, but the flip side of that, next project, I'm talking to electrical project manager, and we're talking, you know, his concern is manpower leveling. The GC's concern is hitting dates. So they care about production rates, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, well, would you share your labor hours with us? Like how much you've budgeted for this job? If we were to say we will work to help you with like rate leveling, would you share that? And he was like, absolutely not, because then you'll count my production hours, you'll see that they're less, and you'll pay me less. I'm like, okay, that's where we are, right? Like it's like.
So you measure things at the detail in which I need to really help you, but you won't share them because you're worried that I'm going to use them against you, and not bill as much to the owner.
Even if I say I'm going to use that to actually help you.
Yeah. But I think this goes back to the contract type and the lack of trust in the industry. And Anil, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I was going to give you an example of lack of trust. So this is several years ago when I was working in the Phoenix market with home builders. The home builders at that time had trade partners. The trade partners would have a job position called drive-by scheduler. And so you have a central schedule we have lots on which various work activities are going on. I was part of at that time of a technology called Air Tools, where you can actually use, I'm sure many of you won't even know this, BlackBerry system to send information about what's coming up, which lot was opening up for construction and so on. It was all ignored by subcontractors. So the trade partners had a guy who would drive 50 miles in Phoenix every day, going through the subdivisions, seeing which lot was ready for them, ignoring the bar chart, the schedule completely, because they knew it was wrong. It was not being updated, the information was not there. So they would actually themselves figure out which lot was ready for them, let's say slab on grade, or which inspection was going to fail, and therefore their work task is going to get delayed. And that's all trust. So to your point, Laurie, I think one of the things I have noticed, and I've worked quite a bit with the US market as well, is that we have a little bit of an allergy towards international standards. As soon as I go into a meeting and say, I'm RICS and we want international standards, I'm pretty much walked out of the room very politely. Because it's not, we don't like international standards. But then the fragmentation of data is a global problem. Lack of trust, lack of collaboration is a global problem. So even though there is more openness towards NRM or other standards that we try to promote in some countries, we still get the same issues relating to somebody measuring from a source of truth that they don't want to share. So you build your own CDE, and from there you're building your data or information resources. So I think the challenges are the same.
Well, let's pivot to like this side. I mean, we kind of argued about no trust or minimal trust and different types of challenges. So like, you know, Dylan talked about AWB, we talked about standards, WBS, and I don't know what LBS, CBS means, but there are different types of measuring tools. How do we build a single breakdown structure, at least for tracking, so that we can dynamically serve all stakeholders? You know, trade contracts might be having extra fields of data or extra measurements that they care, and they may not want to share everything, but at least we can talk some lingo where they can share part openly, which doesn't hurt their competition or their profit margins. So we're looking at building like some kind of, you know, document source, and Laurie, this is what you kind of introduce yourself, organization level data. Like, what can we define? Well, how can we combine these three forces, trade contractor, GCs, and partial of AEs and owners? Okay, everybody can share this with no hesitation, and we can actually build this together, and then technology providers can help us digitize that.
I think one interesting is like, what is the minimum, what is the one thing that everybody can agree on for that?
That everyone wants to get paid.
Everybody wants to get paid. Like, because like anticipated man hours, right? That's not a universal thing, right?
It's not, yeah.
Name of area. Even that is not a universal thing, right? Like the names of areas used in design are different. Sometimes
your general contractor typically doesn't schedule to an area, they schedule to a zone. So yeah,
right. Or room numbers are not assigned until the very end of the project by the owner.
Yep. I guess maybe just a slightly different question here is, you know, if we think about what's the, you know, common goal here is, you know, if it's all of us to get paid and to finish the project, hopefully on time, what are the most basic things that we would want to make sure that are consistent? When we look at this, there's like measurement value and an estimate, area, all these things. I mean, these are all hoop dreams, but like, what are the bare minimum ones that we need to get standardized?
I think it's the list of objects in the building. is the one thing that everybody can agree on. Or should be conceptually, right?
Yeah, I agree. List of objects. They can come to a nomenclature. They can talk the same language, but yeah, this is what
Whether you, yeah, whether you call this concrete or whether you call this, shotcrete installation, there's a wall.
So list of objects in the building, that's like, how do you, sorry, words here. That's very vague, because the list of objects could be like floor 1, walls, floors, cabinetry. Like how detailed does that list need to be? In what format does it live? In what structure? Do you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah, no, I'm just starting with like, what's the one thing that we all can agree on? There's objects, they get assembled to be a building.
Yeah.
Is there something more that we can, or there's things, even to use a vaguer, here, I just made it bigger. There's
I just changed it to components, things, components, assets,
objects, elements.
There's stuff. Let's just say there's stuff that we need. I don't know, Dylan, Jared, what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's having design nailed down and broken up. Like, obviously, because I'm BIM and VDC, I'm just always going to revert to that's probably the best way to do it and build off a model instead of a drawing. I don't know. It's tough. It's a very tough one. But I personally I think having just a well-developed model really helps define a lot of these things that everybody can agree on. So and then providing access to everyone, and so that they can all contribute to that model to understand what the project entails. Like that's going to be the great decider for what people agree on. That's what I see.
What about trades, like with the CSI level code? In North America, owners are somewhere familiar with those codes, and sophisticated projects, I'm sure data center projects, they're estimating to that level as an owner too. And it also goes to the trade level as well. That could be one common area that they can look at. Let's start measuring across trade contractor, AE, GC, and even owners start to care that move from lump sum mentality and get to the CSI mentality. And that probably is measurable by cost and by schedule too.
I think I agree. I mean, the model-based approach is probably the right way to go forward. But I think the issue still comes back to the same area, which is that your design workflow, for example, is fragmented or not connected to cost workflow. So most of our members come up with a cost, right? And as the project evolves, more and more information is added. So the designer is authoring a model with lots of information. But as that progression takes place, that evolution takes place, the cost estimates are not connected. They may be using some other classification system. They may not even talk to the BIM model or the model that we're using. So I think somewhere we need to also think of connecting these workflows.
I think, yes, Andrea, I think you've hit on something really interesting there. No, I mean, I think haven't just hit on it now, obviously you've been thinking about this, but I think the model is the best tool we have right now to have a complete object inventory of what goes in the building. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think it's the best tool we have right now. And it's better than a 2D drawing. And also, cost is the thing that drives contractors more than anything else. So if we can connect this tool, which is the best tool we have for an accurate object-based inventory, to the thing, the cost codes, the thing that the contractor cares most about, we're setting up for success downstream to have an accurate data collection. I think it's like aligning incentives. Like, why would you do this? You do this because it's directly connected to why you make money as a business, your cost codes and what you're doing there.
Yeah.
I also think it's the most automated when you talk about like all those objects exist in the model and there's no recreation or duplication effort that has to be done.
There's an idea of
Minimal.
about to get shut down by
Yeah.
that breakthrough get shut down.
It's
Contract style is really important too. Design build, it's been really good for us, really good for the collaboration aspect, but yeah, lump sum is where people start to hide stuff and are less willing to look for the best solution. So really good model, good contract, good project usually.
We see a direct correlation between design build and subs and who uses Assemble.
Yeah.
In your organization. But
Okay.
Yui, do you have?
I was going to say, Betsy, you came in right under the wire. I think we're about to pull the groups back together. That was timed perfectly. But Yuhi, with a few moments left, I do want to give you some ability to respond.
Yeah, no, I mean, Betsy said it perfectly. I think, being able to look at that like engagement, quote unquote, data against the demographic group is really key, because this does happen a lot we know a lot of our general contractors and specialty trades, like we are heavily white, heavily male organizations in most cases. And so it makes sense, honestly, that your engagement score is really high, because the majority is answering those questions and the majority is dictating what the overall score ends up being. And so it is really, really important to start to really apply the demographic filter to the experiential data to really better understand, like, is this actually every single person or is this the majority, which seems like the company.
Great questions. Darren, you hit the nail on the head with that one, because I think that was the piece we hadn't really uncovered here, was if we are measuring, maybe we're going, it's fine. In fact, the last roundtable we had, we asked how many were having challenging conversations around diversity inclusion, and the answer was 2% of those attending.
Wow.
So we were like, okay, so even in our group here, we're not having a appropriate representation of where we probably need to lean in the most. So, which is why we think this is so important for us at this stage, is to say, let's really start to do some research around this in order to give the business leaders greater insights into really where they should be focusing their efforts, getting a baseline of really where are we, and then being able to give them the tools to assess their own businesses and choose the culture that they want in order to become that employer of choice. So thank you so much to Yuhi and Betsy for joining. And I really appreciate Darren and Bianca for being in the gallery and asking their questions today. The group is going to be joining us back in here shortly.
Oh, we're back. We've been
Oh,
back.
you're back. Thank you.
We've been listening this whole time, Sasha. Sorry. Sid was leading the supply chain breakout, which is really, again, a mashup of, we entitled it supply chain because it is really about the digital handoff of the planned cost and schedule planning to the actual reporting of completion through multiple different formats. But reality capture being at the core of it, because it came from that topic 4.2. So Sid, I will let you take it away and give a summary of what you guys talked about and any takeaways.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan. It was a small group that we had representation from software industry standards, general contractors, and we kind of touched mainly focusing on standards. So we have Anil, who represents RICS, a global UK-based forum, and he educated us about NRM, new rules of measurement, and how it's being deployed in Commonwealth countries, mainly in the Middle East, Asia, and someone in Canada. And then Laurie and Bree, brought their perspective of from the February event about what are we trying to do? We're trying to build trust. We're trying to connect the dots, design, prefabrication, and owner, and how tech and standards to do it. So it was focusing on how to use in your organizations. We had Ryan presenting his perspective of, and then we have somebody from Zachary Trillium Group, and he explained this. I'm the owner rep, and we'll use a technology or tool that we don't really enforce the standards there. So we spent time brainstorming about, is there a common object between general trade or trade contractors or owners that's common? One sign was $, or money, or maybe an object. So couldn't really we debated, nobody win in the end, but it was a healthy discussion, and then time ran out. So, but overall, my takeaway was we have processes, we have these, forums, NRM, CII, CSI, but there's lack of trust is forcing the industry to not connect. And as he said, every owner wants their own standard. That's a culture we probably can impact and see how can we bring them together, because if 10 owners, 15 owners started together, and that can shape up, that can make software providers happy, that can make GCs, okay, we're gonna follow this to measure progress. I think that's what the key takeaways, and I think thank you for the forum for providing their inputs today.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Sid.